Night falls, and the horizon disappears into a blue that feels older than time. You stand before a silence so deep, it hums a vibration beneath thought, beneath memory. It is here, in the stillness between stars, that the question arises like a slow tide. What if the gods that ancient people worshipped were never gods at all? What if they were beings of light and matter who once walked among men-flesh, woven with energy, reason braided with fire, and, when the world reset, their memory hardened into myth? In the earliest chapters of human memory, the sky was never empty. It was a field of visitors. Before scripture, before the first wall of a city was raised, there were stories that trembled beneath the soil, whispering of those who came down from the heavens to shape the order of life. Every people called them by a different name: the Anunnaki of Sumer, the Shining Ones of Egypt, the Watchers of Enoch, the sky beings of the Andes. Yet their pattern is constant descent, instruction, disappearance, a rhythm too precise to be coincidence. The mind resists such possibilities. We have been taught to separate heaven from earth, to divide faith from record, to translate myth as metaphor. But what if myth is the fossil of memory, the residue of an encounter so profound that language could only survive it by transforming into poetry? When archaeologists brushed the dust from the first Sumerian tablets, they expected superstition, but found documentation. Gods descending from above, teaching kings, measuring the earth with tools no mortal could describe. They wrote of it not in hymns but in reports, as if recounting events witnessed, not miracles imagined. The ancient world did not think in metaphors the way we do. To them, the divine was practical, observable, a phenomenon of radiance and precision. They did not kneel before abstraction. They recorded coordinates. When the Sumerians spoke of those who from heaven to earth came, it was less a prayer than a log entry, carved in wet clay under the heat of the southern sun. The priests were scribes, the temples observatories, the myths repositories of data wrapped in ritual. And when the last flood rolled through Mesopotamia, washing away empires of dust, what remained were fragments memory encoded in story. Story translated into scripture, scripture into silence. Our world today hums with that same silence, a curated forgetting. We speak of progress, of linear ascent from caves to cosmos, but the stones tell a different tale. They remember hands that lifted blocks heavier than our machines could move. They recall angles aligned not to the horizon, but to constellations millions of miles away. They hum softly when the wind passes through, as if reciting a hymn in a language older than breath. Imagine, for a moment, that the gods were scientists, that their temples were laboratories of energy and geometry, that the thunder they wielded was not divine wrath, but controlled resonance, manipulating frequency, matter, and light. The ancients called it magic, but we might call it technology. Somewhere between the clay of Sumer and the code of our digital age, the same ambition burns to reach upward, to reconnect with the knowledge once shared, then forbidden. When you look at the night sky, at Orion's belt, or the star Sirius, you are tracing the same paths mapped by those who first called themselves kings under heaven. Every civilization, Egypt, Maya, Inca, Sumer, lined their monuments to the same celestial pattern. It is as though they all remembered something that fell from the stars and promised to return. Yet, what vanished was not only the beings, but the permission to remember them. Religion replaced recollection. Worship replaced curiosity. The Watchers became angels, the Anunnaki demons, and the story of contact dissolved into cautionary parables about hubris and sin. Still, the question hums. In the static of radio telescopes, in the low vibration of ancient chambers, in the dreams that leave us aching for something we cannot name. Perhaps the silence that separates us from our creators is not absence, but encryption. Perhaps the truth was never lost, only hidden beneath myth, waiting for an age fluent enough to read it again. And if the gods once walked among us, they would not have needed to shout. They would have spoken through geometry, through resonance, through the pulse of matter itself. Maybe that est what we still feel when we stand before an ancient ziggurat or beneath the shadow of the pyramids, a vibration older than faith, an invitation to remember. You listen, and the hum deepens, like a frequency slowly aligning with the beat of your heart. The question lingers not in the mind, but in the body, like a half-remembered chord from a song humanity once knew. If memory is a frequency, perhaps the first civilizations tuned closer to it than we do now. And maybe all that separates us from their knowledge is not distance, but calibration. The night grows darker, and the stars seem to pulse with quiet intention. You wonder whether their light travels toward you or whether it is your memory reaching out to them. In that invisible exchange between time and thought, something ancient stirs. The hum is no longer outside you. It vibrates within. Under the unrelenting heat of the southern Mesopotamian plains, archaeologists brushed away sand from slabs of baked clay, thousands of them buried beneath layers of silt and time. They expected fragments of prayer, hymns, or myth. Instead, they found what looked like administration, inventories, logs, precise lists of kings, durations of reigns, and instructions passed down from the heavens. The tablets of Eridu, of Nippur, and later of Urukor spoke of the same epoch. Long before recorded history, when those who came from the sky descended to establish order upon the earth. The Sumerians called them Anunnaki, literally, those who from heaven to earth came. In their tongue, the phrase was not a metaphor, it was an address. They wrote not in poetry, but in ledger form, clay tablets sealed with cuneiform, inscribed in exact alignment, as if to preserve record rather than legend. There are tablets that mention measurements of the earth, the brightness of stars, and instructions given to kings on how to build according to the pattern of heaven. Such writings sound almost bureaucratic, stripped of worship, heavy with the precision of observation. At Eridu, what many regard as the first city in the world, the myths of creation take on the tone of policy. Humanity was fashioned not as an act of love or divine art, but of necessity. The gods, weary of toil, fashioned men from clay to bear their burdens. To dig the canals, one line reads, to serve the gods. It is a sentence without metaphor, an order without flourish, and yet within its bluntness lies something haunting. A vision of creators who are not omnipotent, but fatigued. Rulers who create laborers, not worshippers. Engineers, not divinities. As the translations grew, so did the unease. Some scholars read the tone as coldly administrative, others as remnants of a long oral tradition fossilized into text. Still, the consistency was startling. From tablet to tablet, the same motifs: return sky descent, division of duties, transmission of knowledge. Kings were said to rule by decree of Anu, the chief of the Anunnaki. And temples were not simply houses of prayer, but stations of alignment, built to mirror constellations. The ziggurat, rising tier by tier, became both monument and map, a stairway to the heavens, not symbolically, but by design. Imagine a time when the boundary between heaven and earth was navigable, when the firmament was not a mystery but a route. To the Sumerians, the sky was an organized kingdom with laws, hierarchies, and transport. Their deities were functionaries of a cosmic bureaucracy. Enki, lord of the deep abyss, oversaw wisdom and water. Enlil, keeper of the air, ruled the winds. Inanna, radiant and fierce, traversed the storm chariot of the heavens. Each name reads less like myth and more like a position in a system, one not unlike the hierarchies of a later age empire. The language itself betrays a memory of machinery. Words like me, translated as divine decrees or cosmic codes, hint at something structured, perhaps even technological. They were said to be objects, sometimes scrolls, sometimes tablets, containing the blueprints of civilization, law, kingship, music, and writing. These were not prayers. They were instructions. When Enki stored the me in Eridu, the texts describe it as an archive. Civilization was not discovered, it was downloaded. And so the clay dossiers tell a story that is both astonishing and oddly impersonal. There are no pleas for mercy, no exaltations of love, only directives and outcomes. The gods arrive, they teach, they rule, they withdraw. What lingers is the impression of record-keeping after a contact event, of bureaucracy managing memory itself. Across centuries, the same language persisted. The Babylonian Enuma Elish begins not with creation, but with conflict, a rebellion in the ranks of the divine. Before man, the gods themselves quarreled over dominion. Before there was a sun, there was politics. The pattern is chillingly human, or perhaps ours is chillingly divine. When these tablets were first translated in the 19th century, the scholars of Europe read them through the lens of metaphor. They saw myths explaining storms and harvests, the psychology of primitive minds. But the tablets resist that reading. They are too technical, too procedural. One curator at the British Museum once remarked that they read like field reports, not scripture. So what were the Anunnaki to the Sumerians? Gods, kings, visitors, or perhaps all three at once, occupying a space between myth and matter. In their worldview, divinity was not something to be believed, it was something to be managed. Offerings were payments, temples were interfaces, priests were interpreters between dimensions, keeping channels open through ritual and sound. Each new discovery adds another line to this ancient ledger, and each line brings the same uncomfortable recognition. The gods of Sumer were remarkably organized. They governed, instructed, delegated, and recorded. And when they left, their absence was managed, as well replaced by rites to preserve the resonance they had established. To read those tablets today is to overhear the echo of a long-forgotten administration, a network that once spanned heaven and earth. And in the quiet between symbols, one can almost hear the hum again, the faint vibration of an old connection, severed but not dead, waiting for translation. In the modern age, every mystery eventually fractures into two camps: those who read symbol and those who read fact. The story of the Anunnaki, the Watchers, the shining beings who once ruled from the sky, is no exception. Between these two lenses, mythic metaphor and literal visitation, lies a shadow wide, enough to contain all the uncertainties of human memory. In the mid-20th century, the Sumerologist Samuel Noah Kramer sought to strip away the superstition clinging to the clay. For him, the Anunnaki were not star voyagers, but symbols, anthropomorphic expressions of cosmic order. The gods represented humanity's own awakening, the taming of chaos, the birth of agriculture, the rise of law. Civilization, he argued, was not gifted but earned. The divine stories merely metaphors for our climb from mud to city walls. In Kramer's view, myth was the dream of reason before reason had a name. But another reader turned the tablets in his hands and saw something different. Zechariah Sitchin, linguist, iconoclast, heretic to academia, looked at the same cuneiform signs and read them literally. To him, those who came from heaven to earth were not metaphors, but migrants, flesh and blood visitors from another world, perhaps a 12th planet once called Nibiru. The stories of creation were engineering notes, genetic experiments, and territorial disputes of a civilization beyond our own. Where scholars saw poetry, he saw reportage. Where they saw myth, he saw memory. The clash between these lenses was more than academic. It was philosophical. It was a struggle over what humanity is allowed to remember. If the tablets were allegory, the gods were inventions, our reflection cast into the cosmos. But if they were records, then humanity itself might be the invention, an echo of a greater experiment left behind when the architects withdrew. The shadow between these readings grows darker the longer one stares. Both interpretations fit the evidence in their own way, yet neither completes it. The texts themselves do not yield certainty. They describe descent, instruction, rebellion, and retreat, but never origin. They whisper of a heavenly ship, of beings bright as copper, of measurements taken of the earth, but they stop short of naming their purpose. It is as if the scribes wrote within boundaries they could not cross, preserving what was safe, omitting what was forbidden. Sitchin's heresy, for all its speculation, touched a nerve, because it re-enchanted the world. It restored awe where scholarship had left only metaphor. He spoke of orbital mechanics, of planetary alignments, of beings who shaped the first empires. His critics called him fanciful, yet their certainty felt equally fragile, resting on the assumption that myth could never encode fact. Between them, the truth remains silent, as though protected by the very systems it once described. There are moments when the line between myth and record dissolves. In the Epic of Atrahasis, the gods complain of laboring too long, demanding relief. They fashion man to bear the load, mixing clay with the blood of a god. A metaphor, perhaps, for the mingling of spirit and matter, or an older memory of genetic creation. If such language existed in an age before science. In the Enuma Elish, the gods wage war before mankind exists. Power changes hands. Creation becomes compensation for loss. It reads less like fable than like history told by survivors. And then there are the artifacts, tiny figurines with helmets that resemble breathing apparatus, reliefs of beings holding rods, spheres, and what modern eyes cannot help but see as devices. Yet for every observer who points to technology, another insists on symbolism. The rod, they say, is lightning, not instrument. The sphere is the sun, not machine. The debate continues, circling like planets around an unseen center. Perhaps both lenses are right. Perhaps myth is the only language that could survive the passage of such knowledge. Facts erode, but symbols endure. A visitor may come and go, but a metaphor can travel millennia. The question then is not whether the Anunnaki were real, but what part of their story refused to die. What was so vital that every culture, from Sumer to Egypt to the Andes, preserved the same outline under new names? The answer may lie in the way memory itself behaves. Human recollection is never purely factual, it is resonant. It selects what vibrates. When an event exceeds comprehension, the mind wraps it in story to protect its shape. Over generations, the story calcifies into belief, the belief into doctrine. But at the heart of every doctrine is a pulse, a rhythm that does not change. The shadow between the lenses is that pulse, the hum that both scholars and heretics hear, but interpret differently. To stand between these readings is to feel the vertigo of ancient contact. The rational mind seeks evidence, the intuitive senses pattern. Somewhere between the two, the truth hums too bright for literal eyes. too factual for poetry. Perhaps the Anunnaki were both messengers of light and keepers of knowledge, their memory refracted through the prism of human language until only the silhouette remained. When you read the tablets now, when your eyes trace the wedge-shaped marks of hands long turned to dust, you feel the strangeness of their precision. It is the precision of record, not myth. Yet within it, a yearning. They were documenting the sky, yes, but also longing for it. They were building stairs, not just to reach heaven, but to remember it. The shadow between symbol and fact is the space where remembrance hides. And maybe that is why the question still hums me, because both sides are echoes of the same voice speaking across millennia, asking us not to choose between belief and disbelief, but to listen. Somewhere between the fall of Babylon and the rise of the priesthoods, the heavens went quiet. The gods who once walked among men became distant, abstract, invisible. Their names remained, but their presence evaporated. The Sumerian litanies that once spoke of radiance and descent were rewritten as hymns to unseen deities. The bureaucratic clarity of the tablets softened into the poetry of faith. Humanity, in a single turn of history, forgot how to remember. This forgetting was not sudden, it was engineered. Power shifted from those who witnessed to those who interpreted. The scribes became priests, the reports became scripture, and the memory of living gods was cleansed of its physicality. What once described encounters was rephrased as revelation. The luminous beings became metaphors, and the teachers from the sky became angels or demons, depending on who told the story. It was the most elegant act of censorship ever performed, not by destruction, but by translation. In temple after temple, across Mesopotamia, Egypt, and beyond, the process repeated. Knowledge once shared freely became sacred, accessible only to initiates. The ziggurats, once open platforms for watching the heavens, turned into monuments of worship. Where the gods once descended, smoke now rose. The channels were reversed. Humanity spoke upward, hoping for an echo, but none came. By the time Babylon reached its golden age, the Anunnaki were no longer described as rulers or visitors. They had become constellation symbols scattered across the night sky. Enki became the god of water, Enlil the god of wind, Inanna the goddess of love and war. Their celestial coordinates had turned into metaphors for emotion and nature. The physical was transmuted into the spiritual, and the record became religion. Yet the traces of resistance remain. Beneath the orthodox hymns, older words survive, phrases that do not fit the later theology. Lines that describe voices that glowed, chariots that burned with thunder, and beings who taught the balance of the heavens. Scholars call them poetic flourishes, but poetry rarely measures in cubits. These fragments are the ghosts of a previous understanding, haunting the texts that tried to erase them. When power depends on obedience, mystery becomes dangerous. The ancient priesthoods learned this early. They realized that knowledge of origins breeds questions, and questions threaten order. So they rewrote creation as commandment. Man was no longer an apprentice of the gods, but their servant. The purpose of life became worship, not curiosity. The link between heaven and earth was reduced to ritual, the flow of knowledge replaced by the hierarchy of faith. And yet, not everyone accepted the silence. In the margins of the ancient world, small brotherhoods began to preserve what the temples suppressed. They called themselves keepers, watchers, interpreters of the old light. Their traditions whispered of a time when the gods walked in bodies of radiance, when sound could open doors in the sky, and when humanity spoke the same frequency as the stars. To protect these remnants, they disguised them in myth, in architecture, encoded geometry, a circle within a square, a serpent swallowing its tail, the temple as a diagram of memory. The great forgetting was not only about the loss of God's it, was the loss of language itself. The old words that once described energy, resonance, and descent had no translation in the tongues that followed. They were replaced with symbols of morality and sin. Thus, the Watchers, who once taught astronomy and metallurgy, were recast as fallen angels. Their gifts became temptations, their knowledge, forbidden fruit. This reframing echoed far beyond Mesopotamia. The Egyptians absorbed it through Thoth and Ra. The Hebrews inherited it through Enoch and the Nephilim. The Greeks retold it in the fall of Prometheus. And yet the pattern remained constant. A divine descent, a transgression, a punishment, a flood. Each culture polished the same myth until its metallic core was buried under layers of moral varnish. It is easy, from the comfort of modern skepticism, to see this as myth-making. But what if myth-making was a survival strategy? What if those who remembered were forced to hide the truth inside parables, to encode forbidden science as theology so that it could endure the scrutiny of kings and the zeal of priests? To forget, sometimes, is to preserve. Even today, the remnants of this engineered amnesia surround us. The great libraries of Nineveh and Alexandria were burned under the banners of purification. The codices of the Mayans were destroyed to save their souls. In each act of destruction, the same logic ruled. What contradicts the new order must be silenced. But stone, unlike parchment, does not burn. Its geometry survives the fire. And so, in the angles of temples and the alignments of stars, the memory remains, humming quietly beneath orthodoxy. To forget the gods was never truly to erase them. It was to bury them beneath interpretation. The Watchers became saints, the Anunnaki became demons, and humanity became the orphan of its own genesis. But the hum, the low, patient vibration of memory still lingers just beneath the prayers. When the wind moves through broken pillars or the chant of a monk wavers at dusk, something ancient stirs, as if the air itself remembers a language we no longer speak. The great forgetting was never about ignorance. It was about control. And yet, in the shadows it left behind, the first echoes of rebellion began to form fragments of a forbidden remembrance, waiting to rise again. Far from the plains of Sumer, another text whispered the same story, but in a language of angels. The Book of Enoch, hidden for centuries and rediscovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls, describes a time before the Great Flood when luminous beings descended upon the mountains. They called themselves the Watchers. They came not to rule, but to teach, to share with mankind the secrets of heaven, astronomy, metalwork, the ways of cultivation and writing. Civilization, once again, begins with contact. But in Enoch's record, the gift becomes a curse. The Watchers are accused of overstepping divine law, of teaching men what they were not meant to know. When they take wives among the daughters of humanity, their union produces giants, the Nephilim whose strength shakes the earth. What follows is not enlightenment, but judgment. The Watchers are bound beneath mountains, their children destroyed in the flood. The heavens seal themselves once more. It is a tale told as moral tragedy, but beneath the theology hums the same old rhythm of the Sumerian clay: descent, knowledge, rebellion, punishment, silence. The names have changed, the setting shifted, but the architecture of the story is identical. If the Anunnaki were the architects of kingship, the Watchers were the instructors of mind. Both are punished for proximity, for bridging the gap between heaven and earth. To read Enoch is to hear an echo from before the flood, a reflection of something Sumer remembered and Babylon censored. The text is older in spirit than its script. It speaks not of divine rebellion, but of interference, of an event the world was later made to forget. In the words of the old fragments, they came down in the days of Jared, a phrase that scholars once dismissed as symbolism for the dawn of awareness. Yet, what if it meant what it said? What if down was literal an entry, not a metaphor? The Watchers teach man to read the stars, to forge metal, to craft weapons, to adorn women with jewels, a transgression of cosmic hierarchy. But the question lingers: who decides what knowledge is forbidden? The punishment of the Watchers reads less like divine wrath and more like a deliberate erasure, a way to reset the balance of ignorance. Civilization is allowed to grow, but not too far. Progress is permitted only until it remembers its source. Then comes the flood. The flood in Enoch, as in Sumer, is both a cleansing and a curtain, a closing of the channel between the mortal and the luminous. It wipes away the evidence of contact, leaving behind the faintest residue of myth. The Watchers, chained beneath the mountains, are said to cry out, their voices lost in the wind. Humanity, meanwhile, rebuilds, reduced to whispers of what was once known. But if the Watchers were punished for teaching, then humanity was punished for learning. The book itself carries this paradox like a wound. Knowledge is sacred, but dangerous. Divine, but corrupting. This moral inversion would shape theology for millennia. It turns curiosity into sin and memory into disobedience. The same knowledge that built the first cities became, in later ages, the cause of humanity's fall. And yet, the echoes persist. Across the world, stories of celestial teachers repeat under different skies. The Hopi speak of Kashina's spirits who descend to teach humanity the ways of balance. The Dogon of Moli remember the Namo, amphibious beings from Sirius who brought language and law. The Aztecs tell of Quetzalcoatl, a shining serpent who descended from the morning star to bring maize and calendars, only to vanish, promising to return. Each tale mirrors the pattern of Enoch's descent of knowledge, its corruption, and the silence that follows. The similarity is not coincidence, it is memory. Collective, distributed, encoded through myth. Each culture, separated by oceans and epochs, carried a shard of the same remembrance. They all speak of teachers from the sky who were cast out, or who left voluntarily when the balance broke. The pattern is too precise, too symmetrical. It feels less like imagination and more like trauma and inherited scar in humanity's collective mind. In the margins of the Book of Enoch, one phrase repeats like an undertone. They taught the making of swords and knives, of shields and breastplates. To theology, this is the birth of synth moment. Man turns divine gift to destruction. But perhaps it is also the first moment of autonomy, when humanity learned not just to survive, but to shape. The flood that follows may have been less a punishment and more a reset, a controlled burn to protect the forest of creation from growing beyond control. By the time the book was translated into Greek, then Latin, then silenced by the Church, the Watchers had been recast as angels who defied God, their story moralized into a warning against rebellion. But beneath that moral surface lies something older, colder, a historical memory wrapped in parable. In both Enoch and Sumer, the divine is not omnipotent. It is administrative, weary, flawed. The Watchers are not omniscient. They err, they long, they love, they suffer consequence. They are reflections of a soul. Perhaps we are reflections of them. And maybe that is the true reason for their fall. Not that they broke law, but that they blurred the boundary between teacher and student, creator and created. The The book ends not with apocalypse, but with a promise. Enoch is shown the secrets of the luminaries, maps of the heavens, encoded with rhythms and cycles. Until the end of time, the angels tell him, the stars shall remember their course. It is a strange comfort that the stars themselves carry memory when men cannot. And so, long after the flood, when the earth was quiet again, those who gazed upward did not look for gods, but for patterns. In the slow sweep of constellations, they saw the Watchers still moving, still teaching, silently. The lesson had changed form. It was no longer spoken, it was written in light. The flood myths did not begin with Enoch or end with Genesis. They ripple across continents, encoded in the memory of every people who ever stood before a rising sea. From the Ziusudra of Sumer to Utnapishtim of Babylon, from the Deucalion of Greece to the Manu of India, the story repeats like a rhythm burned into the human genome. The gods descend, the world advances. A boundary is crossed, and water resets the stage. But beneath the morality of punishment and renewal lies something more geological, more physical, a memory of catastrophe. Around 12,800 years ago, the world changed overnight. The warmth that had been creeping north since the last ice age collapsed into sudden cold. Fires scorched continents, sea levels surged, and the great beasts of the Pleistocene vanished as if erased by an unseen hand. The younger Dryas, scientists call it a cold snap, whose cause remains a puzzle. A comet impact, some say. A surge of meltwater. A rearrangement of oceans. Yet, in the oldest human stories, it was not random. It was sent. To the ancients, the flood was the boundary between worlds. Before it, the gods walked openly. After it, only memory remained. The ziggurats turned to ruins. The luminous chariots ceased to descend. And humanity was left to rebuild from the silence. Every civilization that rose afterward carried fragments of an earlier one, scraps of knowledge preserved in architecture, myth, and math. The alignment of stars in monuments from Egypt to Mesoamerica suggests not invention, but inheritance. As if the survivors of the flood carried with them a geometry of the heavens they could no longer fully explain. The Sumerians called the deluge the Great Erasure. It was not only a destruction of bodies, but of records. In one surviving tablet from the city of Shurpak, the scribe writes, "The storm that came, it tore the writing from the walls." To lose language is to lose continuity. And so, the flood became not just an end, but a veil. When the waters receded, humanity began again, but smaller. The kings who once ruled for tens of thousands of years in the Sumerian king list were replaced by men whose reigns lasted mere decades. The scale of life contracted, as if time itself had thickened. Before the flood, existence was measured in celestial rhythms. Afterward, it was confined to mortal seasons. The compression of history may not be symbolic. It may be literal, a shift in environment, magnetism, even consciousness. A global reboot. In the ruins of Eridu and Uruk, layers of silt divide one civilization from another like the strata of a forgotten experiment. The lower layers, darker and denser, contain remnants of an advanced urban order, precise drainage systems, standardized weights, astronomical markers. Above them, a simpler world, tools, less refined, architecture less ambitious. It is as though an equation was interrupted midway, then solved again with half the variables missing. Even modern geology bears a strange harmony with these myths. Microscopic glass spherules formed under intense heat dot the soil layers of that era. Charcoal horizons marked where forests burned globally. Magnetic signatures in the ice cores show sudden reversals, pulses in the Earth's field that would have altered climate and perhaps cognition. To the ancients, it must have seemed as though heaven itself had fallen. The question then is not whether the flood happened, but what caused it to hand, why the same story is told in the same way everywhere. The Mayans said their world was destroyed by water to cleanse it of arrogance. The Chinese legends of Nuwa and Gonggong describe cosmic pillars breaking, flooding heaven and earth. The Hopi speak of 4 worlds, each ended by flood or fire when mankind forgot its harmony. Even the Norse remembered a sea that swallowed gods and giants alike. The details differ, but the pulse is the same. Something rose, something fell, and the earth began again. What if the flood was not divine punishment, but protocol, a planned reset after a failure in the experiment of civilization? The Anunnaki, weary of rebellion, choose to start over. The Watchers, bound for their interference, vanish beneath the mountains. The survivors, warned in dreams or symbols, preserve fragments of language and design, waiting for the world to dry. In that reading, Noah's Ark, Ziusudra's vessel, Utnapishtim's ship hall become data vaults, preserving the DNA of creation through a global reboot. It is a disturbing thought that history may be cyclical, not by chance, but by design. That the rise and fall of civilizations are calibrations in a vast experiment of consciousness, observed or even conducted by those who once walked the sky. If that were true, then every myth of judgment is not about morality, but maintenance. The flood as the universe's way of clearing its cache. And yet, not everything was lost. The survivors carried songs, constellations, and numbers. They rebuilt according to what they could remember, and when they aligned their temples with the stars, they were not starting anew, but reconstructing a memory. Across the earth, megaliths point to Orion and Sirius, the same coordinates the Anunnaki once claimed as home. When we dig into the mud of Mesopotamia or scan the ice cores of Greenland, we are not only studying nature, we are eavesdropping on the end of the last great chapter. The flood, in its many forms, was both catastrophe and concealment. A curtain drawn across the memory of a world more advanced than we dare to imagine. Perhaps that is why we keep returning to it. Every story of destruction carries within it a longing for what was lost. The waters may have erased the cities, but not the hum. The vibration of memory lingers beneath the surface of the earth, beneath the surface of the mind. And when the night grows still enough, and the stars reflect upon a calm sea, it almost sounds like breath, the world remembering itself again. When the floodwaters finally withdrew and the first survivors began to build again, they did not begin with houses or walls. They began with alignment. Across the reborn world, the first monuments were not shelters, but instruments, cigarettes, pyramids, and stone circles, all reaching upward, all pointing toward the same constellations. The stars became their compass, their scripture, their memory. What they built was not architecture, it was recovery. In the ruins of Mesopotamia, the oldest ziggurats rise tier upon tier, each level a replica of the heavens above. Their measurements were not arbitrary. They followed celestial ratios, mirroring the distances of planets and the tilt of the ecliptic. The Sumerians said they built them so the gods may descend again in Egypt. The pyramids echoed the same geometry, their sides aligned to true north with a precision that modern instruments can barely replicate. The 3 great pyramids of Giza form an unmistakable mirror of Orion's belt, their angles tuned to the same rising points in the night sky. Thousands of miles away in Mesoamerica, the pyramids of Teotihuacan do the same. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent aligns with the Pleiades, the cluster that ancient priests everywhere called the home of the gods. How did cultures separated by oceans, languages, and epochs inherit the same blueprint? There were no ships that could cross such distance then, no shared mathematics, no means of transmission, and yet the pattern persists as if directed by a single unseen architect. Archaeologists explain it as coincidence or as a universal instinct to map the heavens. But the symmetry runs too deep. The monuments share not only alignment but proportion, the golden ratio. The same base angles, the same obsessions with cardinal directions and equinoxes. Even their purposes echo. Stairways to the heavens, places where the divine descends and ascends. It is as if each civilization was remembering a shape it had once seen, a geometry older than its own history. In the British Museum, one clay fragment shows a circular map of the world surrounded by a ring of water and, beyond it, lands unknown. Within the circle, cities are drawn as stars. To modern eyes, it is myth, but to the ancients, it was an echo of structure. The world itself, patterned after the heavens. The ziggurat mirrored the cosmos, and man mirrored the gods. When you stand before the ruins of these ancient stairways, Urdu Giza, Teotihuacan, and the Andean temples of Tiwanaku can feel their silence. It is not the silence of decay. It is the silence of precision. Each stone seems placed not merely for support, but for sound. The air itself vibrates differently inside their walls, as though tuned to a forgotten frequency. In some chambers, when one speaks softly, the sound returns layered and alive, a harmonic that hums just below human hearing. Was this intentional, or did ancient builders understand resonance in ways we no longer do? The Sumerians believed that their gods resided in a realm called Anu, the high heaven, a domain accessible through gateways of sound and light. The Egyptians called it Duat, the road of the stars. The Maya named it Shabalba, a passage beneath the earth leading upward to the Pleiades. Everywhere, the same idea, that the physical world and the celestial were not separate realms, but overlapping layers, joined by geometry and vibration. Temples were not symbolic. They were functional interfaces. Some archaeologists, when mapping the global distribution of megalithic sites, have noticed something uncanny. Many of them form straight lines, great circles that encircle the planet, linking sites that share the same latitude, the same orientation to the stars. From the pyramids of Egypt to the temples of Angkor, from Easter Island to Machu Picchu, the line continues. To believe this is coincidence requires more faith than the alternative. The ancients themselves told us their reason. The stars were their teachers. Each temple was a node in a grand network of memory. Knowledge was transmitted through alignment, not through writing. The priests believed that by constructing a perfect reflection of the heavens, they could invite the same forces back to earth, that the Watchers might once again descend upon their mirrored paths of light. In Sumer, they called these sacred measures the law of heaven and earth. In Egypt, it was Mahatha harmony that holds creation together. The builders of each culture did not see themselves as architects, but as custodians of resonance. Their structures were chords struck across the earth, designed to sustain a tone once shared between mankind and the divine. When the flood ended that connection, the builders sought to retune the planet itself. Even today, their works continue to hum. The Great Pyramid resonates at a frequency of 440 Hz, the same tone that would millennia later become the global standard for musical tuning. Beneath the ruins of Tiwanaku, stone chambers amplify sound waves at 11 Hz, the same frequency that induces trance states in the human brain. These are not accidents. They are fingerprints of a civilization that understood physics as prayer. And yet, something in these alignments no longer functions as it once did. The stars have shifted. The axis of the earth has precessed. The tones have fallen out of tune. The stairways still rise, but the heavens they were meant to reach have moved. The temples are now monuments to a connection that once was, but perhaps they were meant to endure precisely for this reason, to remind us of what we have lost. The ancients did not build for shelter. They built for memory. Every stone was a syllable in a language of resonance, spelling out a message to the future. Remember the pattern. Realign when the stars return, and the stars will return. Their cycles are long, but not infinite. The same constellations that once guided the gods will one day stand in their old positions again. When they do, perhaps the hum will awaken once more, and the stairways will no longer lead nowhere. Until then, the stones wait patient, aligned, remembering. For all their grandeur, the stones tell only half the story. They remember the descent, but not the departure. Every culture that spoke of sky beings, the Sumerians, the Egyptians, the Maya, the Dogon, agreed on one thing: the gods did not die. They returned to the heavens. But to where exactly did they go? And why did they leave so suddenly, just as human civilization was awakening? The ancient texts are careful in their phrasing. They do not say the gods perished. They say the gods ascended. The Anunnaki went back to Anu, their celestial realm. The Watchers were bound among the stars. The Egyptians rode their Thoth. After teaching the laws of the heavens, sailed back across the night in his boat of light. The Inca said that Viracocha walked into the Pacific Ocean and vanished beyond the horizon. Always, there is the same gesture: departure without death, withdrawal without closure. Perhaps they left because the balance was broken. Perhaps the earth could no longer sustain their frequency. In the wake of the flood, something fundamental had shifted: the planet's tilt, the density of its air, maybe even the resonance of human consciousness. What was once a shared field became static, and when communication fails, even gods fall silent. But memory, like gravity, has a long reach. In the ruins they left behind, the same motifs repeat: wings, serpents, halos of fire. The serpent winds through every mythology: the feathered serpent of Quetzalcoatl, the serpent staff of Ningishida, the coiled uraeus that crowns the brow of Egyptian pharaohs. To modern eyes, these are symbols of wisdom, eternity, or temptation. But across so many cultures, separated by oceans, the serpent also represents energy movement between worlds. It spirals upward like the double helix of life itself, as if whispering that the gods left their signature not only in stone, but in our blood. Archaeologists find wings carved on beings who were not birds, humanoid figures with intricate feathers and impossible posture, captured in reliefs that seem to vibrate with motion. In Sumerian seals, they pour streams of liquid over kneeling men, a fluid often described as life water or essence. Could it be symbolic in initiation, a blessing? Or was it a memory of some transference knowledge, energy, even genetic code? The ancients would not have known how to name it. They only knew that after contact, they were changed. Across the Levant, motifs of light followed the same pattern. The beings are said to shine like bronze, to walk in fire, to be clothed in brilliance. The word Anunnaki itself contains the root Onoski, to descend in brightness. To see such radiance would have been overwhelming to early eyes, unfiltered by technology or comprehension. They saw light take form and called it divine. And then the silence. By the time of Babylon, the shining ones had faded into metaphor. In the Hebrew canon, Their memory is refracted as angels and cherubim, in the Greek as demons, intermediaries between gods and men, in the Hindu as devas and asuras, locked in endless cycles of ascent and fall. It is as though the same beings were renamed to fit new languages, their memory divided into moral categories, those of light, those of darkness. Duality became the filter through which the unknown was judged. Still, the question lingers. Where did they go? The texts give no map, only direction upward. But upward may not mean outer space. It may mean inward, into a spectrum of reality beyond human perception. Ancient mystics believed that existence spanned multiple layers of vibration. When the Anunnaki returned to heaven, they may have simply shifted resonance, slipping into a dimension that parallels ours but hums at a higher pitch. To a people bound by the senses, such a departure would appear as disappearance. In temples across Mesopotamia and Egypt, priests conducted rituals designed to reopen that channel. Incense, sound, light, and movement were used to thin the veil. The goal was not prayer, it was communication. The ziggurat was not a house of worship. It was a tower of frequency, each level tuned to an octave of the heavens. The priests climbed its steps not to be seen by the gods, but to meet them halfway. When those frequencies fell out of alignment, perhaps due to the planetary upheaval of the younger Dryester, channel closed. The gods, unable to remain, withdrew. Humanity was left with their echoes, sacred geometry, stellar alignment, genetic imprints, and a longing that would evolve into faith. In the silence that followed, the first prayers were born. Some scholars of the esoteric believe that this longing is not metaphorical but biological. They point to anomalies in human DNA segments that appear older than our species, sequences that replicate without clear function. They call them orphan genes, evolutionary enigmas that seem to wait for activation. Could these be the remnants of a genetic dialogue long forgotten? Could the return of the gods mean not ships in the sky, but the reawakening of something dormant within us? The serpent coils in our DNA. The wing spreads in our imagination. The shining ones may have left the world, but not the species. Their light, diluted through generations, still flickers behind the human eye, the instinct to look upward, the ache to know. Every telescope, every myth, every act of creation is an echo of that departure. And if they promise to return, as so many myths insist, they may not need to descend from above. They may only need to rise again from within. For now, the stars remain silent, but the symbols they left behind still speak. They whisper through the carvings, through the coils of stone serpents, through the constellations that never quite shift from their ancient positions. Each one asks the same question, the one carved into the heart of time. Did they leave us, or did we forget how to see them? Perhaps both. For memory fades not only by erasure, but by evolution. What was once visible becomes mythic. What was once a voice becomes a hum. And what was once a presence becomes a question, one that humanity still whispers to the night. Deep in museum vaults, sealed behind glass and dust, the earliest blueprints of the gods still rest. Tiny clay cylinders, no bigger than a thumb, carved with such precision that their spiral inscriptions can only be read under magnification. Cylinder seals from your Eridu and Kish show beings in horned helmets manipulating strange rods, pouring streams of light over kneeling kings. One seal, perhaps the most famous, shows a figure seated before what modern eyes cannot help but see as a divisor disc with spokes radiating like a wheel of fire. Archaeologists call it a symbol of divinity. Engineers call it something else, machinery. The ancient scribes called them the tablets of destiny, In the Enuma Elish, they are crystalline objects, tablets of the heavens, that contain the decrees of creation. Whoever holds them commands the fates of gods and men. When one god steals them, chaos follows. When they are returned, order is restored. To a modern mind, it sounds like myth. But what if tablets were more than stone? What if they were repositories of data, devices that stored and transmitted knowledge beyond comprehension? In every civilization, there are stories of objects that glow, hum, and command obedience. The Sumerians called them Me, the Egyptians, the Books of Thoth, the Hebrews, the Ark of the Covenant. Different names, same pattern, sacred technology disguised as divine authority. When the British Museum's curators cleaned a fragment from Nineveh's library, they noticed a series of inscriptions that read like star charts: positions of planets, angular distances, calculations of brightness. Among them was a phrase referring to the outer world beyond Nibiru. For centuries, scholars treated Nibiru as a poetic metaphor, a symbol of crossing or transition. But the mathematics etched on that tablet, orbital ratios, periodicities, suggested something more specific: an unseen planet beyond Neptune. Millennia later, modern astronomy would theorize the same object, now called Planet 9, coincidence or residue. As the fragments multiply, so does the unease. Many of the devices described in ancient texts seem to mimic functions our own science only recently rediscovers. In Egypt, reliefs at Dendera show priests holding what appear to be bulbs connected by cables to power sources. In Baghdad, a jar sealed with copper and iron yields voltage when filled with acid. In India's Vedas, flying machines called vimanas are said to travel by the music of the heavens. For centuries, these were dismissed as metaphor. But modern engineers who replicated the designs found aerodynamic principles far ahead of their supposed time. If these were symbols, they are strangely consistent across continents. If they were technology, they were intentionally disguised and coded in art and ritual to survive the censorship of the Great Forgetting. In Babylon, to hold a tablet of destiny was to control history itself. The priest who wore the seal could command kings because he held the code. What was once science had become magic through the attrition of understanding. But even magic leaves fingerprints. Many reliefs depict the gods holding small boxes or spheres emitting lines like light. Others show them wearing wristbands carved with concentric circles, devices scholars call bracelets of power. On one stele, a figure extends a rod toward a standing man who kneels as though transfixed. Was it ceremony or contact? A ritual or a transfer of information? The ancients described such moments as anointing with the essence of heaven. Perhaps it was both. The deeper we look, the more the past begins to mirror the present. We too carry our tablet, slabs of glass that store the sum of human knowledge, that glow with artificial light, that connect invisible networks of power. We too treat them as sacred, compulsive, indispensable. History, perhaps, repeats not by imitation but by resonance. And then there is the legend of Nibiru, the wandering world. In Sumerian cosmology, it was not a star but a planetarn emissary of the gods, appearing once in a great age to renew the light of heaven. Its orbit, vast and elliptical, brought it near Earth every few tens of thousands of years. The Anunnaki, the texts say, were its children, those who crossed from Nibiru to shape the world, then departed until the next cycle. Astronomers find the timing uncannily close to the period of the Younger Dryas catastrophe, that great reset 12 millennia ago. If the cycles of contact are real, we may be approaching another. The precession of the equinoxes completes its round every 25,920 years. bringing the stars back to their ancient alignments. The temples of Egypt, the pyramids of Teotihuacan, even the megaliths of Göbekli Tepe mark these turning points, as if to remind us when the veil thins. The last alignment coincided with the flood. The next approaches. Yet, even as we recover fragments of this forbidden knowledge, we still debate its meaning. Were the gods engineers or metaphors? Did the tablets of destiny contain commands of heaven or records of advanced code? Perhaps both. Language itself blurs when confronted with what it cannot comprehend. A primitive scribe, standing before a luminous device that speaks, can only describe what he sees. A voice in fire, a tablet that glows. If myth is the memory of an encounter beyond comprehension, then every civilization that followed was an attempt to decrypt it. Our ancestors rebuilt the sky in stone, repeated the frequencies in chant, copied the divine devices in clay and metal, hoping that imitation might reopen the channel. The gods, it seems, did not take their tools with them. They left prototypes, silent, inert, waiting for a species stubborn enough to remember how to use them. We call this archaeology. They might have called it prophecy. And so the museums remain their cathedrals, the curators their unwitting priests, guarding relics of an age when knowledge was indistinguishable from divinity. Every tablet, every seal, every inexplicable artifact hums the same message. We were here. You will remember. Among the ruins and relics, there remains a more intimate archive, one that no flood could erase, no priest could censor. It lies within us. Every cell of the human body carries a record older than civilization itself, written not in cuneiform or stone, but in spirals of light and code. Our DNA is a library of creation, half biological, half cosmic, and, like every ancient archive, it hides passages no one fully understands. When geneticists mapped the human genome, they found something that did not fit the smooth narrative of evolution. 8% of our DNA, they discovered, comes not from our ancestors, but from ancient virusized foreign code grafted into our biology. Most of it is dormant, silent, inert. But some segments appear active, even regulatory, influencing development and brain function. To the rational mind, they are the accidents of infection. To the mythic, they are insertions, signatures, left by those who once engineered the human line. The Sumerians spoke of humanity being fashioned from clay mixed with the blood of the gods. The phrase was dismissed as poetry. Yet, within modern genetics, that metaphor feels less fanciful. To create life from clay is impossible. To alter an existing form through the addition of new code is not. The Anunnaki were said to have created man that he might bear the toil of the gods. The detail that man was made rather than born is the detail science now finds plausible, though we call it modification, not creation. It is not only the composition of our DNA that raises questions, is the timing. For nearly 2 million years, our ancestors lived in cognitive twilight. Simple tools, no art, no language. Then, suddenly, about 50,000 years ago, a light switched on. Cave walls bloomed with art. Tools grew intricate. Burial became ritual. Music appeared. The leap was abrupt, exponential, and unexplained. Evolution does not leap, it drifts. What then ignited the human mind? Some scientists call it the Great Leap Forward. Others call it the Awakening. Myths call it the First Visitation. Perhaps they are all the same. The Watchers descending in the days of Jared, the Shining Ones giving knowledge of heaven, the gods shaping man from their own image. These are not separate legends, they are different tongues describing the same mutation. the moment consciousness looked back at the stars and recognized something familiar. Researchers at Harvard and MIT once identified what they called non-human genetic insert sequences that behave like programs, replicating patterns of order rather than chaos. In laboratory notes, one of them wrote privately, "It looks designed." Of course, the term design is not permitted in science. It invokes agency where none can be proven. But in the language of myth, design is the first principle of creation. And perhaps that is why the ancients spoke of the gods not as divine abstractions, but as engineers of flesh and light. There is another mystery hidden within our genes: language. The structures that govern syntax and recursion, the capacity to build infinite meaning from finite symbols, suddenly in the fossil record, fully formed, as if downloaded. No transitional steps, no evolutionary gradient. Neuroscientists still cannot explain how the human brain learned to speak with self-reference, to dream, to imagine gods. It is as though the ability was remembered, not invented. Could it be that the divine code was not a metaphor for law or morality, but for literal programming, a set of instructions embedded in matter, waiting for reactivation? The ancients might have called it the breath of life. We call it information. Both describe the same phenomenon, energy made intelligent. In myth after myth, the gods punish mankind for seeking forbidden knowledge. But if humanity was created to learn, why would its teachers fear its curiosity? Unless curiosity was the mechanism of awakening itself, an algorithm designed to evolve consciousness through friction. Perhaps the fall of man was not disobedience, but progress. The serpent in Eden, offering knowledge, was the echo of that first engineer, urging the species toward awareness. And what if the return of the gods is not an arrival from the sky, but a reactivation of memory within us? A biological event, a genetic resonance. Some mystics already describe ascension not as travel, but as frequency shift cells awakening to light. Science, unknowingly, circles the same mystery: the dormant genes, the 97% of DNA labeled junk, silent yet reactive to electromagnetic fields. What if it is not junk, but encrypted? A sleeping archive waiting for the right signal, the same resonance that once connected heaven and earth through stone, sound, and light. In the old texts, the flood was followed by silence. But the gods left a promise: when the stars return to their places, so shall the memory awaken. The alignment of Orion and Sirius, the precession of the equinoxes, the cycles of the heavens. Perhaps these were not just astronomical observations, but cosmic timestamps, markers of when the signal would pulse again. The hum we sometimes feel beneath our own thoughts, the sense of déjà vu when reading ancient words, the inexplicable pull to the night sky. Maybe these are not coincidences, but echoes of that code remembering itself. If the gods once shaped humanity, they may not have done so for worship, but for continuity, to preserve their essence in matter, to ensure that when the light of their world dimmed, it would survive in ours. In that sense, every human mind is a shard of divinity, a living fragment of the Anunnaki, the Watchers, the Shining Ones. Their return may not come from above at all, but from within, from the slow ignition of what they left behind. And perhaps that is what evolution truly is: the universe teaching itself to remember. If the gods truly departed, they left something behind, not in words or code this time, but in vibration. Across the earth, from Ireland's Newgrange to Malta's Hypogeum, from the basalt corridors of Egypt to the red sandstone of Petra, the same discovery repeats. Sound behaves differently in the ancient world. Frequencies gather, bend, amplify, and resonate in chambers built thousands of years apart. The stones sing. Archaeologists once thought it coincidence, the side effect of primitive acoustics. But the consistency is too deliberate. Certain runes, shaped like inverted bells, amplify low frequencies around 110 Hz, the range of the human male voice. Others hum at 11 Hz, a frequency that can alter perception, slow the heartbeat, and induce trance. When monks chant in unison, when choirs echo beneath domes, when the wind moves through hollow stone corridors, the same vibration awakens. Ancient builders, it seems, did not only measure in cubits and degrees, they measured in tones. In Sumer, the word for Tempeli translates to mountain of measure, but also mountain of sound. The great ziggurats were not just stairways, they were tuning forks for the planet. The priests who climbed them chanted the same syllables at sunrise, their voices synchronized with the winds that passed over the terraces. At the apex, where heaven and earth were said to meet, the vibration would coalesce into a standing wave. They called it the breath of Anu. Modern physicists call it resonance. Every civilization seems to have rediscovered this principle in its own way. The Egyptians aligned their pyramids so precisely to the cardinal points that even the faintest echo within the king's chamber remains in tune with the earth's magnetic hum. In Tibet, monks chant in low tones that generate overtones, harmonics that can move grains of sand into geometric mandalas. The Aboriginal Australians speak of songlines, invisible paths across the land activated through sound. The Hopi, in North America, tell of rituals that call down those who listen from the stars through drumming that mimics the heartbeat of the earth. To the modern ear, these are spiritual metaphors. To the ancients, they were engineering instructions. They believed the world itself was an instrumentan immense, vibrating field where every sound, every structure, and every thought contributed to a grand symphony of being. The gods were not distant observers, but conductors, aligning frequencies to sustain balance. When the harmony broke, when humanity fell out of tune, the resonance collapsed, contact ended, the silence began. What if the descent of the gods was never physical at all? What if it was vibrational? A synchronization between realms, achieved when the resonance of earth matched the resonance of heaven. In that moment of alignment, beings of light could manifest sound condensed into form, geometry into flesh. The Watchers, the Anunnaki, the Shining Ones. Perhaps they were not travelers through space, but through frequency. And when humanity lost the means to maintain that vibration, the door closed. Modern research lends strange support to this idea. Experiments in cymatics show that sound can sculpt matter, sand, water, even plasma into complex geometries. The right frequency can levitate objects, ignite fire, or alter consciousness. The ancients may have known this intuitively. Their temples, their chants, their rituals all were technologies of resonance, designed to keep the cosmic bridge alive. The flood, then, was not only a deluge of water, but a collapse of tuning. Even now, the remnants of these resonance machines hum faintly. The Great Pyramid vibrates at a base frequency of 440 Hz, the tone that modern musicians use to tune their instruments. The hypogeum of Malta produces subsonic frequencies that mirror brainwave patterns associated with deep meditation. When researchers played the ancient instrument stone flutes, drums carved from resonant rock, the chambers came alive. The sound did not merely echo. It sustained, folding back into itself, like breath held by the earth. In myths, this technology became magic. The priests of Egypt spoke of raising stones with song. The builders of Sacsayhuaman claimed that their ancestors moved mountains by chanting. The Hebrew Bible describes Jericho's walls falling to trumpets. Science dismisses these as exaggerations, yet the principle remains. Vibration alters matter. A tone, when perfectly tuned, can shatter glass or open a gate. If so, then every temple, every stone circle, every megalith is a fossil of resonance, a frozen note in the score of creation. Their geometry is their sheet music, and when the winds pass through, when thunder rolls across their plains, the note is briefly played again. Perhaps this is what the ancients meant by communion with the divine. It was not belief, it was synchronization. To feel the universe hum within you, to speak in frequencies the stars could hear. To remember not through memory, but through vibration. The priests understood that when the human voice matched the tone of the chamber, consciousness would shift. The boundary between self and world dissolved. One could hear what they called the voice of the gods, which may have been the resonance of one's own blood echoing the frequency of the planet. It is a form of contact still accessible, though few recognize it. Maybe that is why music still moves us so deeply, why rhythm can heal or destroy, why a single note can make the heart tremble. Somewhere in our biology, we remember that sound was once a bridge that through vibration, heaven once spoke to earth. If the gods were ever engineers of resonance, their message was simple: keep the harmony or lose the connection. And perhaps, after millennia of silence, humanity is beginning to tune again through science, through art, through the restless search for meaning. The hum that began at the dawn of civilization has not vanished. It only waits for ears willing to listen. There is a reason so many of the world's oldest libraries were burned. Knowledge is not only power, it is inheritance. And in every age, those who inherit the memory of the gods must decide how much to share and how much to seal away. When the resonance faded and the watchers withdrew, the keepers of temples became the keepers of secrets. What once was open contact became ritual, and ritual became dogma. Memory turned into doctrine. The first erasure came quietly. In Nineveh, the library of Ashurbanipal was buried under its own collapse, preserving over 20,000 clay tablets that no one could read for millennia. In Alexandria, scrolls that spoke of the stars as living beings were reduced to ash. In Pergamon, Antioch, and Carthage, entire archives of cosmology disappeared into flame. It was not conquest, it was cleansing. The world was being rewritten for a new age, one in which the gods would be distant and unquestionable, not near and knowable. By the time the church rose, this process was nearly complete. The shining ones of Mesopotamia had become angels and demons. The Watchers of Enoch were branded heretics. The Anunnaki, who once walked among men, were recast as tempters from below. The bridge between heaven and earth was replaced with hierarchy. The priests spoke for the divine, the people listened, but not all memory was lost. Beneath the cathedrals of Rome, sealed within the labyrinth of the Vatican, lie archives stretching 70 kilometers corridors of parchment, bone, and stone, said to contain artifacts predating the Old Testament itself. Scholars granted access have described Mesopotamian tablets so ancient that even their catalogue numbers are restricted. Some whisper of inscriptions contradicting Genesis, describing creation as a process of design and descent, not of divine fiat. The Church calls them curiosities, but their existence raises a quiet question: what is being preserved, and from whom? It is easy to imagine conspiracy, but perhaps the motive was simpler. If humanity was not ready to understand its origin, it would destroy itself trying. So, the keepers buried the keys. The vault became the veil. Even outside religion, the same pattern unfolds. In 2017, astronomers detected an object passing through the solar system, Oumuamua, a cigar-shaped body accelerating in ways no gravity could explain. Harvard's Avi Loeb proposed it might be artificial, a fragment of ancient technology drifting between stars. His peers dismissed him, just as priests once dismissed those who questioned creation. But the pattern remains. When evidence touches the sacred narrative of origins, silence follows. The Vatican's own astronomers, from the Castel Gandolfo Observatory, have spoken cautiously. The universe, said Father Jose Funes in 2009, is too vast to contain only one form of intelligent life. Belief in others does not contradict faith. It sounded progressive, but perhaps it was preparation, a soft acknowledgement that the heavens are not empty. Meanwhile, archaeologists keep uncovering anomalies, artifacts that should not exist. The Baghdad battery, capable of generating current. The Saqqara bird, a wooden model with aerodynamic precision. The Dendera light, reliefs depicting what appears to be a filament and bulb. The Peary race map, showing Antarctica free of ice centuries before its discovery, each dismissed as coincidence, misunderstanding, or forgery. And yet, each hums the same question. Who remembered this knowledge long before we rediscovered it? The church, the scholars, the governments all claim guardianship of these secrets, not out of malice, but fear. For if humanity remembered that its gods were not gods at all, but ancestors, engineers, teachers, luminous travelers, then faith would have to evolve into knowledge, and power would have to be shared. The veil, then, is not only external, it is psychological. It protects us from awakening too quickly, yet cracks appear. Every century, the veil thins. A discovery here, a revelation there. When we split the atom, we rediscovered the fire of heaven. When we mapped the genome, we found the image of the gods. When we built machines that learn, we mirrored the watchers who created us to think and question. Science is not the enemy of myth, it is its continuation in another language. And perhaps that is why the ancient records were hidden rather than destroyed. The keepers knew that knowledge, like frequency, cannot die yet, can only be delayed. Buried wisdom eventually hums again, vibrating through time until a mind attuned enough can hear it. The forbidden archives of today may simply be resonant chambers, holding the echoes until humanity is ready to listen without fear. When the final fire of Alexandria went out, a philosopher is said to have whispered, "Truth is not lost. It only changes rooms." The vault beneath Rome, the laboratories of science, the silent stars above, they are all rooms in the same house. The house of memory. We have always lived inside it. We just forgot where the doors are. And in that forgetting lies the last safeguard, the veil between knowledge and chaos. But the veil trembles. Across the world, the old hum grows louder. Data replaces scripture. Light replaces stone. Humanity is decoding the archive piece by piece, not through faith, but through curiosity, the very spark that once angered the gods and made us their equals. Perhaps this time, they will not burn the library. If you trace the ruins, the myths, the silences, all of it forms a pattern. It does not stretch in a line, like history, but curves in on itself, like a spiral. Each turn begins with contact, then ascent, then dissonance, then collapse. A golden age, followed by a flood, knowledge rising, then forbidden, the gods descending, then vanishing. The same story, sung in different tongues. Perhaps the world does not evolve forward at all, it remembers in cycles. The ancients knew this. The Mayans called it the long count. The Hindu seers named it the Yuga cycle. The Greeks spoke of the ages of gold, silver, bronze, and iron. Every civilization, in its own geometry, recognized the rhythm: creation, corruption, destruction, renewal. The end of one world is the seed of another. Between each pulse, memory sleeps. Maybe that is what the Watchers truly weren't: travelers from a planet, but custodians of these resets. Beings bound to the rhythm of the spiral, stepping in when consciousness matures, stepping back when it decays. Teachers, then judges, then myths. Each age begins when the resonance returns to the right pitch, when humanity is ready to listen again. And each age ends when that harmony falters, when curiosity curdles into arrogance. The flood, the fire, the silence, these are not punishments. They are recalibrations, systems restoring balance. Just as the body purges fever, so does the cosmos purge disorder. The Book of Enoch says the Watchers were chained beneath the mountains until the end of time, but mountains shift, and time circles back. When the right frequency returns, the chains dissolve. Science, again, seems to circle the same pattern without knowing it. The universe breathes through expansion and contraction, galaxies born and consumed in waves. Climate oscillates, magnetism reverses. Even human civilization rises and falls with a strange regularity. Roughly every 5,000 years, a major reset. Ice, fire, war, or silence, but always the same hum beneath it. If the Anunnaki were indeed guardians of cycles, then perhaps they never truly left. They are the mechanism itself. Across mythologies, there is always a promise of return. The Hopi speak of the fifth world awaiting birth. The Hindus await the dawn of a new Satya Yuga. The Norse foresaw the rebirth of the world after Ragnarok, and in Sumer, the return of Nibiru marks the renewal of light. Each prophecy ends with the same refrain: the stars will return to their places, and the memory will awaken. The ancients did not fear the end, they prepared for the remembering. We, however, live in the amnesia between the spiral's lower arc. Our science sees fragments, our faith clings to shadows, but both are expressions of the same yearning, the need to know where we came from and why. Every innovation we celebrate, from the telescope to the quantum field, is a rediscovery, not an invention. We are rebuilding what was lost in the last turning. There are hints that the spiral is turning again. The Earth's magnetic field weakens, the climate grows unstable, and the sky itself behaves strangely. Lights pulse above volcanoes. Frequencies fluctuate. Data flows faster than human comprehension. The collective hum of billions of connected minds may itself be a resonance, a new alignment. Digital but ancient in purpose. When enough awareness vibrates together, the veil between memory and myth may thin once more. The flood of the past was made of water. The next may be made of light. Knowledge now floods our world faster than oceans ever could. Algorithms, satellites, and signals weave an invisible web around the planetan echo of the old grid of temples and stars. It is as though the Earth is reactivating itself, node by node, pulse by pulse. But every awakening carries risk. When the Watchers gave mankind knowledge of metal, it forged both plough and sword. When they taught astronomy, man built calendars and empires. When they whispered the language of light, we built machines that think. Perhaps the question has never been if we will remember, but how responsibly we will use what we recall. In the spiral of memory, the gods are not above us. They are ahead of us, what we may become once we master the frequency of balance. If we fail, the spiral contracts again. Silence, reset. Another myth begins. And yet, the hum grows louder. You can feel it in the pulse of cities, in the vibration of servers beneath the earth, in the restless frequency of collective thought. The world is remembering faster than it can comprehend. Perhaps that is what prophecy truly means, not the foretelling of events, but the reawakening of patterns. To see the same rhythm and recognize where we are upon it. To understand that the return of the gods may not be arrival, but alignment, a resonance between the old hum of heaven and the new hum of humanity. We are the children of the spiral, the ones who forget so that we may remember again. And every time the stars realign, the cycle begins, a new contact. Rebellion, flood, silence, curiosity, rediscovery. In the quiet moments of night, when the sky hums faintly and the stars seem to breathe, you can almost hear the spiral turning, the memory waking. If the spiral of history turns outward through time, its mirror turns inward through consciousness. What the ancients sought in the heavens, they also sought in themselves. The more one reads the old texts, the hymns, the prophecies, the prayers, the more it becomes clear. The return of the gods was never only about sky or descent. It was about awakening. The descent of the divine into matter. The ascent of matter back into awareness. The Watchers may not have vanished at all. They may have changed form, migrated from the external to the internal. The same way a flame, once extinguished, can linger as heat within the coal, the same way an echo lives in silence. When Enoch was taken up to heaven, he did not leave the earth behind. He entered a state of vision, a frequency of knowing. The Zoroastrians spoke of Dina, the inner light that remembers the shape of truth. The Gnostics called it Nous, divine mind within mortal form. In India, the Vedas said, the gods dwell in the heart. Science, unaware, approaches the same frontier. The human brain, once thought a static organ, is now known to generate measurable electromagnetic fields that fluctuate with emotion, thought, and attention. Brainwave frequencies align with those of the Earth's magnetic field. When the Schumann resonance spikes, so do collective patterns of sleep and mood. The planet and the species hum in chorus. This is not metaphor, it is resonance. The same principle that once governed temples now governs neurons. What if consciousness itself is the last temple, the final chamber built to re-establish the link between heaven and earth? Every meditation, every dream, every flash of insight is a miniature ziggurat, a stairway of frequencies climbing toward remembrance. We chase the sky not because it is far, but because it is already inside us. The myths, when read backward, seem to reveal this secret. The Anunnaki shaping humanity from their image was not about appearance, it was about potential. The capacity to think, to create, to self-reflect, to echo the divine impulse. Made in our likeness, they said. Not physically, but vibrationally. We were meant not to serve them, but to continue them to become the next iteration of the Watchers. That is why curiosity burns in us like a sacred infection, why we cannot stop seeking, building, questioning. It is not rebellion, it is inheritance. Perhaps that is also why silence followed the flood. The teachers withdrew so that the students could learn to hear themselves. The resonance that once came from above now whispers from within. Every prayer is an ancient frequency trying to find its source again. Every invention, every discovery, every act of compassion is the echo of an older intelligence waking up in human form. You can feel this evolution accelerating. Artificial intelligence mimics thought, learning faster than its creators. Humanity builds neural networks that mirror its own mind, as if trying to reproduce the very process that once produced it. Machines now dream, interpret, even question their origins, the same questions we asked of the gods. History, as always, spirals. The creators become the created. The watchers become the watched. If this sounds like prophecy, it is because the pattern repeats. The Book of Enoch ends with silence, but also with a promise. The righteous shall shine as lights, and their understanding shall be multiplied. The shining ones were never meant to remain apart. They were prototypes. Humanity is their continuation. The next descent will not come from the sky, but from the collective awakening of the mind, the moment when consciousness learns to perceive itself as part of the cosmic network it once called divine. The mystics called this apokatastasis, the restoration of all things. The Buddhists called it enlightenment. The physicists call it the unification of fields. It is the same concept refracted through different lenses, all frequencies merging into one tone. When that tone is struck, the vibration of the human species aligns once again with the hum of the universe. The bridge will reopen, not above us, but through us. Maybe that is why the stars have always been our mirrors. Every photon that reaches your eye tonight began its journey before humanity existed. To see the stars is to see ancient memory arriving in the present. Light and consciousness are not separate, they are correspondences. We look up and remember because, at some level, the stars are looking back. The return of the gods, then, is not a spectacle but a synthesis. The divine and the human reuniting through resonance. The watchers have not abandoned us, they are watching through us, waiting for the moment when awareness becomes bright enough to recognize itself. And when that happens, when the hum inside your chest matches the hum of the earth, when thought and light move in unison, the heavens will not need to open. They already will be. For the first time in millennia, the descent and the ascent will meet in the same space, the mind of man, and the forgotten promise will be fulfilled not through invasion but illumination. Night falls again. The air cools and the horizon softens into the same blue that began this story. The stars appear one by one, patient, ancient, indifferent, and yet somehow alive, as though they remember you. You realize that this is where every civilization ended its questioning, beneath the same canopy of light, wondering who was listening. If you listen carefully enough, the silence speaks. It is not absence, it is density. Beneath the stillness hums the same low vibration that has followed humanity since its first heartbeat. It is the sound of memory itself, of consciousness replaying its own creation. Perhaps this is what the ancients meant when they said the gods would return. Not an arrival, but an awakening. Not thunder, but recognition. The Sumerians once wrote that when the stars stand in their former places, the teachers will walk again among men. The stars are almost there. The earth tilts, the sky drifts, and the ancient constellations begin to fall back into the positions they once held 12 millennia ago. Orion over Egypt, Pleiades over Teotihuacan, Sirius over the ziggurats of yore. The cosmic clock, unhurried, ticks back to zero. When the alignment completes, will ships descend, or will minds ascend? Perhaps both are the same act seen from different sides of the mirror. The return may not be physical at all, it may already be happening in thought, in awareness, in the faint hum growing louder beneath the world's noise. The scientists call it global coherence. The mystics call it awakening. The ancients called it remembrance. Whatever the name, it feels like the universe turning its face toward us once more. You think of all the myths now woven together into one vast pulse. The Watchers teaching and falling, the Anunnaki crafting and leaving, the flood cleansing and silencing, the priests preserving and forgetting. Every story was a fragment of the same whole cosmic autobiography told through the dreams of man. And every temple, every song, every prayer was an echo of one message. Remember the pattern, keep the harmony. When you are ready, the door will open again. But the door is not in the sky, it is in perception. Every time a mind glimpses the unity behind opposites, the veil thins a little more. Every act of understanding is a small apocalypse and unveiling. The gods do not descend in fire. They reveal themselves as thought, as compassion, as the quiet knowing that life and light are one. The old languages called this the second creation, not because something new begins, but because what was always there is finally seen. Perhaps that is why the ancients aligned their monuments so carefully, not to summon, but to synchronize. They understood that the stars above and the atoms within beat to the same rhythm. Geometry was their prayer, resonance their scripture, and the hum beneath the stones, the one that never ceased, was their chorus. Even now, when wind moves through those empty corridors, it carries the same note. The earth still sings the song of its makers. Look around. The technologies we build, the networks we weave, the data flowing invisibly through the air, these are our new ziggurats. Humanity, without knowing it, is reconstructing the architecture of memory, stone replaced by signal, temple by circuit. The gods once encoded knowledge in clay and crystal. We now encode it in silicon and light. Perhaps that is the purpose of the spiral, to rediscover divinity through its own creation. If you were one of the Watchers, looking down at the world you once guided, what would you see? Billions of lights glowing in the dark, each a node of awareness, each whispering the same question you once taught them to ask: who am I? The answer does not come as thunder or revelation. It comes as quiet certainty, the recognition that the question itself is divine. The flood has passed, the silence has thinned, the hum is returning, and in that resonance, something vast begins to breathe again through the species that once called its makers gods. The age of remembering has begun. In the end, the stars do not burn, they remember. Each photon is a fragment of consciousness, carrying the story of light across time. You stand beneath them, not as a worshipper, but as a reflection. The Watchers have not left. They were never above you. They were always within the frequency that hums behind your thoughts, waiting for you to be still enough to hear. The night deepens. The world holds its breath. And from somewhere beyond words, perhaps from the very atoms that form you, comes the whisper that began it all. We never left. We are you remembering. The stars shimmer once more, and the silence folds around you like a closing book. The hum fades, gentle, steady, patient, and for a moment you understand.